the Via Stoica Podcast with Brendan and Benny. Powered by viastoica.com, your home for coaching, workshops, quotes, and Stoic content that inspires. Welcome to the Via Stoica Podcast. We're happy to have you here in this lovely conversation. Brendan is here with me. Brendan, how are you doing today?
Well, Benny, I am doing fantastic, my friend. It's another wonderful day here in Panama. How are things over there on your side of the pond?
Yeah, I'm doing good here. I'm now in Greece instead of in the Netherlands, I'm back in Greece, but I'm doing well here as well. And I'm very excited because we have an extraordinary guest today. We're joining us, and I'm very excited to speak to her. A jack of all trades, but a master of many as well. If we can see from this conversation today, and I'm really looking forward to it. We're talking to Shermin, who is an author, a speaker, professor, a TEDx producer, and she is, and a lawyer. She has worked in many different, styles of different occupations, and she has just released a new book, Stoic Empathy, in April of this year, 2025, and we're going to dive into that book. And she's been, featured in Forbes, and the Chicago Tribune, the Huffington Post. She's done many things, and she's a negotiator as well. But we're going to hear more from her about all of this stuff because I don't think I can do justice to everything that you've done. But Shermin, welcome to the podcast, and how are you doing today?
My old friends, Brandon and Benny. It's such a pleasure. Hey, I'm doing excellent. The sun is finally out in Chicago. It took long enough, but it's finally here. And spring is finally here, about a month and a half later than it should have arrived. But I'm happy. Life is good.
Oh, that's good to hear. I've never been to Chicago, but I've heard it's quite windy and cold in the winters, right? But in the summers it can get quite nice. So I'm happy to hear that spring is happening.
Yes, it is. It is the best city in the world. I do have to say that. It's the best city in the world. And it's the only really big urban, multi-million people environment that's as green as it is. There's trees and plants and parks, everywhere in the city. And that's really lovely. And I think it's the better intellectual hub of the United States because it's all of the intellectuals without any of the pretension.
Okay. Well, you sold me, I'm not the expert. We could see, Brendan from Florida and from all of these things, and we can have a debate on that. But we love to talk to you more about all these things, and especially about, also about travel and everything, because we know that you have a big history in that as well. But we wanted to kind of have you introduce yourself to the audience. So please go ahead and share us a little bit more about yourself.
Certainly. Well, I would actually think that Benny did a really great job introducing me. I suppose he didn't mention anything personal, so I can talk about myself on a personal level. I will say that I fail frequently. I try to live as authentically as I possibly can and as warmly and as connected as I can. Try to measure the success of each day, not by the number of tasks accomplished, but by the amount of connection experienced within the day, both with myself and with my environment and the people around me. I have 4 kids. I'm in love with my kids. They come up frequently because they are the joys of my life, and they also suck the soul out of me on a daily basis. And so I'm often complaining about my children as well. I am married. I'm going on 19 years of marriage. So it's been a hot minute. We've been through a lot together. And I would say that when I really think about what is the purpose of my life, of my existence, I think it is to gain a better understanding of human nature and to be able to share that understanding with my community. So that's a little bit more about me. I mean, Benny did a great job of talking about the book, Stoic Empathy, Stoicism, and empathic connection, and the combination between those two. It's been driving me most of my life, but particularly in the last few years when I've been writing this book. So I'm sort of living and breathing the book right now because I'm on book tour. So I get to have conversations with brilliant people like you guys for hours and hours a day, which is really exciting. And really imagine if that was your job. If your job was, I guess your job is because you're podcasters, but literally if your job was to talk to brilliant people about issues of ethics, philosophy, history, travel, parenting, leadership, imagine if that was your job. It's pretty much the coolest job in the world. I didn't get here easily. I actually practiced law for nearly 20 years before I got here, but I'm here now and I'm loving every moment of it.
You're talking about is how this idea of, developing, kind of growing in this journey and developing your own personal philosophy. Obviously, this is a philosophy podcast. We're going to talk about that and get into the book here in a little bit. But if you could kind of just give us a brief sort of overview of your personal philosophy and what that is for you in this moment, I'd love to hear that.
Wow, that's a big question. My personal philosophy. So it's interesting because I think when we think of what our personal philosophy is, we tend to confuse that a little bit with our morals, our ethics, our values. And I would say those things are rather distinct because my philosophy would be the way I conceive of the world, whereas my morals would be the way I conduct myself within the world. And I think those two things can be quite distinct, but obviously also vastly interrelated in a would-be Venn diagram. So the way I see the world, and it's so interesting, Brendan, that you ask me this question now, because this has been an issue for me ever since I was a child. And it's really weird to know a child who thinks about these issues. But I grew up in the Islamic Republic of Iran immediately post-revolution and during the Iran-Iraq War. So I grew up in an environment that was very restrictive, that was extremely oppressive, particularly religiously so. And thus I grew up in an extremely secular environment because my family rejected the oppressive measures with such extremity that there was no room for really anything beyond that which you could tangibly and physically touch and prove immediately in front of you. So I sort of led for most of my life an extremely logical life. I was like a Vulcan, you know what I mean? Like I just led this, nothing that I can't see or touch exists unless you can prove it to me. It doesn't exist. Now I'm sort of in a strange place where I'm increasingly drawn to Sufist philosophies and Buddhist philosophies and Native American philosophies and, just secular humanism, the idea of a shared collective between humans and between living things. And so my philosophy is changing and adapting and forming and I hope growing. And, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be in a position to re-examine things. And it's kind of an adventure too.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And obviously, having read the book, we know a little bit more about your history, and I wanted to dive into that as well. But that's something that we really try to promote on the podcast as well. Obviously, it's about Stoicism, but we would like people to be inspired, from stories like yourself to create their own philosophy of life and also understand that that's a fluid, evolving thing for people. So I really appreciate you for bringing that up. And I kind of wanted to, and also to dovetail a little bit into the book, but to share a little bit more about your history, where you came from and how that shaped you to writing the book and also to where you are from where you are now in your life. You start the book with such a kind of a poetic description of a wonderful night, right? Where you talk about, with your Aunt Lily, with the dancing and that kind of being a form of a protest, right? Against but also about living and how to use those two combined. Could you use that to kind of shape a little bit more and to share a little bit more of like where your background came from and how that helped you shape where you are now?
Yeah, I love it. I do start the book with dancing, and it's so interesting because Persian dancing is very much, you move like water. It's very fluid. It's the entire body. It's the arms, it's the waist, it's the hips, it's the heads. Everything is moving. And so it's an extraordinary way to rebel against the oppressive government, which does not want us accentuating our bodies in that way. So I was born in 1977. And, in case you are not a student of Iranian history, the revolution occurred in 1979. When the Islamic Revolution occurred, as most revolutions, really, this is a very common thing between revolutions. Usually you have various factions who agree to align themselves for purposes of overthrowing the existing entities. And then once the entity is overthrown, fight amongst themselves for the power seat, right? So we had very different factions vying for this revolution. We had the Islamic faction, we had the Democratic faction, we had the communist faction. Communism was a huge movement in Iran at the time, not from necessarily a social point of view, but from an economic point of view. And so all of these factions collected together, forced out the Shah of Iran. So the monarchy was gone. And now there is a vacuum of power and there's people killing each other over the power. One of the ways in which the Islamists were successful in overcoming the other factions was, they just had more resources and killed more people. But another way was that they aligned themselves with the democratic factions. So what the Ayatollah Khomeini, who ended up taking over after the Shah and really changed Iran in a radical fashion, what he was saying from the sermons he was giving in exile in Paris was, I want equality, I want freedom, I want no mixture between religion and politics. All of things which of course did not happen after the revolution, but that is how he gained a stronghold within Iran. And there was a strong contingency of democratic thinkers, liberal thinkers thinking, well, maybe a theological leader, kind of like a pope, wouldn't be a bad idea because he can unite the people and he's not going to have anything to do with the politics. Well, again, that turned out to be wrong. He ended up becoming a far worse dictator than what we had in the Shah. During that process, those couple of years, hundreds of thousands of people were killed by their friends, right? They were betrayed by fellow revolutionaries. So it was a very strange time. And then it was the regime which had taken hold, the Islamic regime, oppressing and impressing itself upon the Iranian people with a new mandate that simply did not exist a month ago, right? So the mandate for women you're not allowed to run on the street, or you're not allowed to show your hair or the curves of your body, did not exist a month before that. And then it suddenly existed. So as a result, we were not accustomed culturally to these new mandates, and we had to adapt radically and quickly, or we would suffer the consequences set forth by the regime. At the same time, while we're in the middle of all this strife, brother killing brother, we adapting ourselves to a new code of existence, Iraq, our neighbor, declared war on Iran. It was a bloody war. It lasted almost 10 years. It claimed 1 million lives. There was only 40 million people living in Iran at the time. So that's about 1 out of every 40 people. And by the time I left the country in 1988, there was up to 6 rocket attacks a day into Tehran, into the city. And they all targeted civilian targets. So very similar to living in Kyiv right now, I suppose. And so that was the environment. That was where I grew up. So it was extreme restriction on the outside. And then on the inside, I have these parents who have a modest income, but are very highly educated. They're essentially poets and artists. And in the inside the home, you could have this existence that was free. And that's where the parties came into play. And that's where the dancing came to play. And that's where the whiskey you made in your bathtub came into play. And it was a rather radical environment of growing up, and also super confusing. Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. And, I'm sure an experience like that can, shape you in a multitude of different ways. And a few years ago, I did do a fair amount of traveling in Eastern Europe and in some areas there that obviously had their own kind of experience of civil war and strife in the 90s and things like that. And it was such an interesting experience to me because I felt like that's when I started to really physically feel this idea of community and community kind of involvement and support, which I didn't feel in the United States. The United States, I lived in a neighborhood where I barely knew my neighbors. And then I go and I'm living throughout in Eastern Europe and in Croatia and Georgia and Montenegro and these places that had civil war, maybe 10, 20 years ago. But they're so community oriented. They're so driven to help each other and support each other. And so I've always had this theory that maybe that is what causes that, this kind of shared, kind of terrible experience you have to go through, but you do it together and you find these little ways to support each other and love each other and things like that. How do you feel like that experience has gone on to shape your life? And not only that, but how you view kind of this idea of, earlier you talked about the idea of the community and the collective. Do you feel like there's some connection there? Am I right here in this theory?
You're 100% correct. And I think that we can also take it a step further. On the one hand, a shared trauma certainly builds community, even if you think about the United States immediately post 9/11. On the other hand, it can also it can also cast a very clear otherness, right? A very sort of black and white on what is right and what is wrong. And therefore, if you're not a component, or if you are objecting to some of the opinions of that majority community, it can lead to massive amounts of even community driven persecution. Forget about government driven, right? And so I think that it's complicated. What I would say is you learn very quickly who you can trust and who you can't. And the ones you can trust, a lot of times it's your family, although they can betray you as well, but usually it's the family. The ones you can trust, it sort of becomes almost like a mafia-esque type relationship. I mean, you wouldn't just die for each other, you would kill for each other. And that bond is there because of the mix of the dynamic, both this external strife that has brought you together, but also the knowledge that, wow, I can 100% trust you. And that's incredible in this environment, right? Where I could get sold out by my neighbor. And so that understanding, and I would also say on top of that, Brendan, that these cultures, historically, these thousands-year-old cultures are more we oriented. And American culture is extremely individualistic oriented. American culture truly values independence, whereas more Eastern cultures, including Eastern Europe, value interdependence. And it's just fundamentally different the way they relate to the world. And so it's fascinating for me to now be in America, raising kids in America, and this culture that values independence so much, they all go off to leave the house at the age of 18. And it's considered essentially a rite of passage, a way of showing independence, womanhood, manhood, whatever the case might be. In my culture, you don't leave the house unless you start another family. Why? Not because you're incompetent and can't get a job, but because you need to drive grandma to her appointment and plow the snow. You're part of the family. Like you're contributing. And there's one more factor I think that contributes to the togetherness, and that is wealth. America is an extremely wealthy country. The independent wealth of individuals in America, compared statistically to others around the world, the average person from Iran or the average person from Poland, people have a lot more money here. People are more likely to be able to afford their own house, their own car, pay for their groceries. But in that part of the world, people can't. They have to live together to make it work, right? It's something that is born out of a daily necessity to eat and have shelter and education and healthcare, et cetera. And so I think it's a very complex array of factors that lead to what you identified, Brendan, very quite clearly as a community-driven collective culture versus an individuality-driven, independence-oriented culture.
Yeah, I like those, and that reminded me of like I've done some traveling as well, and I kind of look at it two sides of like you have a food culture and a non-food culture. I come from the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands it's like you eat quickly and that's it, and then you go about your business. And then you go to Spain or like Arabic countries, Morocco, where you just like you have food and you sit there for hours on the table all together, like community sense. And I've heard a little bit about Iranian food, and it also sounds wonderful, right? Great food there, but that's kind of like where that community comes together. And we used to have that on the dinner table as well, where you just sit with your family and talk and have the discussions, and that seems to be kind of fading away a little bit. But I like that, how you described it. And if we then take it a little bit further, how was that transition? Because you went from Iran to Canada, right? If I remember correctly.
Correct.
And how did that you as well? And how did that, because you said it was quite a shock, right? I take it for your parents even more, the regime change. And how did that affect you? And what did you take away from that?
I mean, it was massive transition. And it's a really interesting fact about immigrants that immigrate for political reasons instead of economic migrants, that they seek a different political culture. They seek a different form of governmental rule, right? So my parents are moving precisely because they want more freedom for their daughters, and they want this, and they want more equality and for women, and they want freedom of speech. And my dad was a 45-year-old man at the time who had lived in Iran for nearly half a century under a cultural paradigm that made him the head of the household. And suddenly we moved to Canada, and out of necessity, because that's the way it is in the West, my mom, her degree was in applied mathematics, but she had never worked outside the home. My mom had to suddenly get a job, and that job made her economically independent, and that economic independence gave her more power and control. And this resulted in conflicts within the marriage, because it's one thing to want freedom for your daughters, it's another thing to have your wife demanding equality. And my father, much to his credit, became a feminist. It took him a good 10 years. And during those 10 years, we're all adapting while the heads of our household go at it like dogs and cats, right? Because they now have a brand new dynamic that is a clash. And we have left our family, we've left our soil, we've left our language, we've left our culture, we've left all these things. So we're also desperately trying to cling on to what we know while desiring intensely to adapt to our new environment so that we can feel social security within that new environment. And so it was also a constant, very confusing struggle. Like, it matters what I wear to school, because like we just wore the government issued uniforms that everybody wears that cover everything, right? And it matters how I talk to people. It matters who I sit with at lunch. It matters even just those types of politics and dynamics were all new. Everything had to be completely renavigated. And so once again, we were adapting. And so what happened with me is like a constant state of adaptation and practice at that adaptation. I eventually moved to the US, which was definitely a distinct culture from Canada, but I would say far more similar to Canadian culture than Iran would be, for example. And so, but I had to adapt to a culture where healthcare is commoditized, a culture where anyone on the street could just take out a Glock and kill you with it. Like this does not exist in Canada. And democratic governmental structure is far more liberal in its economic approach than the American structure. And so suddenly things that were very normal to me are suddenly radical. In this, I was a radical. I was Bernie Sanders, right? I was a radical in the 90s and 2000s here in America. People thought I was radical. Now, of course, my politics don't seem as radical because we've changed a lot in the last 25 years. But that adaptation too was rather intense. And I would say that it's very similar to what a lot of immigrants go through. And it's a gift and it's a curse. And the gift is that it's like you're given ingredients to the same eggplant stew, but one set of ingredients is from one end of Asia and the other set of ingredients is from the other end of Asia. So you get to figure out how to combine these ingredients to make your eggplant stew. And it's sometimes it tastes horrible, right? And you mess it up. And then every once in a while you hit the magical combination. You're like, wow, I'm so lucky to have had access not only to turmeric, but also to ashwagandha root so that I could cook with both of them. That's extraordinary, right? So once you get through, which I think really happens in middle age, that push and pull of who am I? What's my culture? What is my belief? Also the acceptance that it is not constant and it is shifting. I think you see what you have as an extraordinary gift. And I would say I wish it upon my children. I want them to go spend a few years somewhere else just to learn that.
Oh yeah, that's such a great analogy. I like this idea of the soup and kind of getting your recipe of and picking it up from different places. And I really love that. I'm probably going to tweak it and steal it. So
Okay, sounds good.
I'll make sure to credit
You
you.
have my full permission.
Wonderful. But on that topic, I guess a little bit is as you're going through and you're experiencing these things, at some point in this journey, you found Stoicism, and that philosophy spoke to you in some way. So talk to us a little bit about your kind of, I guess, recipe or journey to Stoicism and how you.
Yeah. So I would say for me, Stoicism was a persistent existence throughout my life, but I didn't recognize it as such until I was older and studying philosophy. But from the time I was little. So one of the stories that I tell in one of my TEDx talks is, and I don't remember honestly this particular night, the story of which I'm going to tell you. I don't remember really what season it was or really when it happened because it was so pervasive and things like this would happen all the time. But I was sleeping with my sisters. We shared a room, the three of us. And in the middle of the night, like at 3:00 in the morning, oh, there's the mug. There's my mug. Okay. You guys who are listening to the audio and not able to view the super cool Via Stoica mug that Brandon has. I'm obsessed with that. They know that we've talked about this before, that I'm, oh my God, a model.
We got a few items.
I'm telling you though, it's something about the way your logo looks. It's extremely appealing. Anyway, back to my story.
Nice.
So, okay.
Of course.
So I'm a
Proceed.
kid. I'm in Iran. It's 3:00 in the morning and I hear the red alert sirens. The red alert sirens are there to inform you that there's an impending missile attacks, right? And you get woken up. It's very loud. They ring throughout the city through the same speakers that announce the morning prayer. So they're quite loud and they can be heard everywhere. And you wake up, you're understandably scared. You're also just kind of groggy and tired and annoyed that you have to wake up because this is like the fourth night in a row that you had to wake up. And your parents quickly gather you up. And then your parents have to decide within a matter of seconds, based on the pitch of the alert, how close the siren is. The pitch of the alert communicates the closeness, right? And then based on that, they have to make a determination. Do we have time to make it to the basement, which was our makeshift bomb shelter, or not? If not, you collect under a door frame or some other sort of structure that can protect you from shrapnel, broken glass, things like that. And so my parents, every single time, could decisively and clearly make this determination. Extraordinary, given the strain of the moment and the fact that they too were woken up for the fourth night in a row in the middle of the night with impending missile attacks, right? And then you hear the explosions and then you feel the aftershock, right? And so they were able to project a calm control in the situation, even though they lacked massive control. The missiles were coming no matter what they did. And they couldn't hide the information from me. They couldn't protect me from the truth. I can hear the missiles, right? I have to get up and hide under the door frame. But what they could do is they could project an emotive control that permitted my trauma to be minimized. And it was precisely their awareness, their empathic awareness of the needs of their children that inspired this sort of superhero ability to perform calmly, and to be a source of quiet in a very loud moment, right? And so this was my model growing up. This combination of empathy and stoicism. Every time my mother had a battle with a member of the morality police on the streets because we didn't have our headscarf on properly or whatever it was that they were bugging us about, every time she had to read the person, read the room, read me, and then she had to regulate her emotions. She couldn't just start screaming or just start crying or lose control, because that would not be to her advantage in that moment, and use that information to gain as much control and power in the situation as possible and to minimize the harm to me. And so this was my model growing up. And then there's the component of the emotive regulation it takes to adapt, to go from home to school, to go from like good little Muslim girl of the Iranian regime who chants in the yard of her school versus the actual girl who's helping her mother prepare for the party where no one is going to show up wearing a headscarf. Like they all come with the headscarves, but they all take them up when they get in. So it was that also required massive emotive control. So I grew up in this. It wasn't until I studied it that I realized, oh, this has a word. This has a term. But that's just semantics. That hardly matters, right? It's just a way of teaching a concept to someone. So what really matters is that state of being. As I grew older, I started to observe it among fighters, boxers, meditators, monks, among people who were able to gain that control. And then what I started to notice was, okay, but what then happens to your authentic self? Where does it go? And who are you really? And that became a massive question in my life.
Oh, I love that journey, and I love that story. And you tell that story throughout your book as well, where your mom and you go on street and you have that, that discussion with the interaction with the lady from the moral police, right? Yeah, discussion. And I want to delve into that a little bit later, because it's just such a great story and such a perfect red line throughout the book as well, with the empathy and all the active listening and all the techniques that you use there. And you mentioned also how to stay that authentic self, right? And we get a lot of people asking that, like, how do you know when you're doing the right thing? And you mentioned at one point in your book that these teachings became more of like your compass, right? Of like and is that a way of like, how did that help you stay with your authentic self and dealing with the experiences you had as a child, and then forming that into what is now you and your philosophy?
Well, the first thing I have to say is, look, if you are thinking about the question of knowing what is right and knowing how to be, first of all, you're already 10 steps ahead of most people. You're already at a point in your thought evolution where you have moved beyond mere instinctual reaction and responsiveness to the world and are now approaching situations with a thoughtfulness. You are already winning. I do believe that it's extremely important to have that compass, to have something that guides you and know that you will sometimes go the wrong way. And when you go the wrong way, it's not the wrong way for me or the wrong way for Benny. It's the wrong way for you, for whatever it is your values are in that moment. We all betray ourselves. We do. We betray ourselves. We get confused, whether it's for love or for money or for success. We do things that we know are counter to our moral value. We justify them based on some sort of grander goal that we have. Well, I have to sell these stereos at a price twice what they're worth because I have to get my kid, through the dentist this year. That's a fair negotiation that takes place in your brain, right? You're cheating your customer, but you're justifying it to yourself because you feel you have a grander goal that makes it okay. But at the end of the day that you shouldn't be doing this because you can't sleep, right? Whereas if you were cheating a truly hostile counterpart who kind of has it coming, I think you would go to sleep just fine. And so, I think that it's very difficult, I think, to tell people what is the right thing to do. It's not up to me to make that decision for you, whether you stand up to the morality guard and get killed, like many women in Iran do, or whether you conform or whether you use that instance to manipulate. It's not up to me to dictate that for you. I just don't have the information that you have. All I want to do is help you gain information, empathically, awareness of your situation, as well as yourself, and emotive control, so that in the moment, whatever decision you make reflects you and not some sort of temporary impulse, right? Because we get pushed and pulled with these impulses and instincts and emotions, which can be highly informative, but we should not allow to become our masters, right? So we get confused and we get distracted. And so if you can just create that space, which is what Stoic Empathy does for you, which is what that compass does for you, that space for yourself between stimuli and response so that you can actually proceed with thoughtfulness. It's not a guarantee that you're going to do the right thing. It's just not. But you know what? As a human being, that is the best way you can live. And in fact, what I can guarantee you is that sometimes you will do the wrong thing. I can almost guarantee that's going to happen in your life. And what's really important is if you're approaching with such thoughtfulness is that you examine that, not in I'm going to sit here and sort of dwell and mope in what I should have said or could have said or should have done or could have done. But I'm going to learn from that experience in order to become an evolved person tomorrow. And therefore, I'll be more evolved a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And so what ends up happening to your life isn't you learning what the right thing is so that you could do it every time. It's more of a practice of a way of being that you get wrong with decreasing frequency if you are paying attention to it. And that is the goal. It is the trajectory that is the goal. I mean, obviously you should do the right thing. I'm not telling you to go out there and do the wrong thing. What I'm saying is I think it's the wrong question because I don't think it has an answer. And so the better question is, how did I approach this decision? What thought did I put into it? Did I consider all of the factors? So for example, my ethics dictate that I should consider my impact on the world around me, not just my immediate family. If I'm cheating this family because I'm charging them twice as much for the stereo and they also have kids that they need to feed, what does that tell me about consistency with my own values and ethics? Sure, I want to get little Johnny braces, but at the same time, I'm not willing to compromise this other portion of myself. And I'm aware of that because I'm connected to myself, because I have habituated myself to that discomfort, because I have a general awareness of when I die, what I want my tombstone and my obituary to say about me. And I carry that awareness with me, right? And so that's really, it's the process that matters, not so much the result.
Oh, that's beautiful. We talk a lot about the process on here and doing process over outcomes. It's not about the end; it's about the journey. That's definitely something that we preach here a lot. So as you were like giving your answer, I was just like, oh my God, this aligns so perfectly. Everything's amazing. So no, that's very interesting, and I really like that. And I think what you do so well in the book is take those practical applications, take the things, kind of cut away maybe the more wordy sort of ideas of Stoicism, and just really get to the core components of here's what you can do, and this is how you can use it in your everyday life. But before we get into that and start digging into the book and the more practical applications of things like that, I did kind of want to just ask you at the beginning, when you either started writing this book or during the process of writing this book, who were you writing it for?
That's such a good question. And the answer is, it's not a good answer. You're not going to like it. Certainly the marketing people at the publishing company didn't like it. The answer is anyone who wants to listen. And, because what I'm interested in, Brendan, is a dialogue, including with my readers. I'm interested in the dialogue. I'm not interested in the small talk. I'm not interested in the banalities. I'm not interested in a meme that goes viral that just says, above all, to thine own self be true. What the fuck does that even mean? And also Polonius said it, who is not true to himself. Like, actually read Hamlet, people. So for me, I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is the dialogue. Now we can break down the dialogue to a level where it's super basic, but each component, each super basic component, super basic tool, right? That's easy to dialogue about, that is easy to understand, together comes to form a comprehensive and complex philosophical state of being. But when I'm writing this book, when I'm writing the tools, I would like leaders and CEOs to incorporate them into their daily practice. I also teach them to my children. And, and linguistically, I tried very much in the book to use language that was approachable so that anyone who is interested in the dialogue, there's plenty of brilliant people in this world who haven't lived with years of philosophical experience. And there's no need for me to throw around my vocabulary knowledge in a manner that might not be appropriate for the average, let's say, incredibly intelligent math teacher, right? Who wouldn't have a clue what I'm making a reference to. So the idea is, let's talk about it in a way that is approachable and understandable and conversational. Let's talk about it in a way that involves tools and habits that you can actually utilize on a daily basis instead of on this super abstract philosophical level. Why? Because I want this dialogue to actually become an action, right? To be transformed into a way of being for you to the extent it serves you, as it is a practice for me and has served me, right? So that was who I wrote it for. It was really anyone who's interested in the conversation. And I tried to mix it up. So there's a lot of science in the book. And one of the reasons I put a lot of science in is that I was fascinated by how the ancients kind of put their finger on what has now become modern cognitive behavioral or radical acceptance therapy, right? That is very science-based. What is it that they understood about humans that we now can prove through an fMRI study that's published in a neuroscience journal, right? So I was interested in that. And so there's a lot of that in the book too. But I also wrote it in a way that you could skip it. If you really don't care about the science, you can skip it. You can just follow along with the stories and the tools, and you're going to gain a lot from that too. And so that was my goal. I mean, I hope I accomplished it. I don't know. It's an ongoing process.
I think you definitely did. And to anyone listening, don't skip the science parts. I think that those were, awesome to add there, and they just provided so much more depth to the topics that you brought up. And I've learned a lot from it. So I think that that's already something that I want to thank you for doing. And as we go to the book, you made this really lovely combination of Stoic empathy. But for a lot of people, they would ask themselves, how can those two concepts align, right? Especially people have a kind of a rather wrong view of Stoicism. That's one of the things that we try to do here, to set that straight. But how did you come to combine those two and then choose that as your topic for your book?
So I do have to, first of all, just give a shout out to you guys, because you really do on this podcast an extraordinary job of presenting Stoicism, not in a way that is one dimensional. You present not just the control aspects and the process aspects, but the justice aspects, right? The core ethical aspects of this philosophy. And I'll say to the listeners, like, you guys, that's really unusual. There's a lot of people out there right now, especially Stoicism has become like almost like a trend now, that have converted it into a kind of a broism culture of, I'm going to man up and not cry over this and not feel anything. And that is not what it is. It does involve a superhuman type of strength and control, but not in a way that will disconnect you from the world, in a way that will connect you to the world in the way you want to be connected to the world, right? And so it becomes a more intentional way of living. And you guys do an amazing job of that. And I want to thank you for that, because it really is extraordinary. I also think that people misunderstand empathy. I think people think of empathy because it is often used in the context of emotive empathy, right? Your pain in my heart, right? So even if I'm just watching a TV show, it's my favorite character. He gets behind the wheel of a car. Something wonderful has just happened to him. I really love this guy. I've invested 6 seasons into him, and he's driving and the sun is shining and the birds are singing and he was fiddling with the radio. And then a text message comes through and he's distracted and it's coming. And suddenly a car comes out of nowhere and T-bones him and he's spinning out of control and there's shards of glass cutting his skin, and you recoil. You physically lean back and recoil, even though you are sitting on your couch and this is happening to a fictional character on the screen. You recoil from the pain inside your nervous system, right? In response to the pain of that character. You're not feeling glass cut your skin, but you're feeling pain. Your pain in my heart. That's emotive empathy. Cognitive empathy is a very well recognized form of empathy, and it is very different than emotive empathy. Cognitive empathy is, look, I'm a trauma surgeon and this child got rolled in and he has 7 bullet wounds and I have to keep him alive. And so I have to have an awareness, right? I have to have a level of caring and an awareness of this child's entire internal systems, organs, how they work, what hurts, what's where, right? What this child can take in an operating room, what they can't, what's happening with their heart, what's happening with their blood pressure. I have to maintain that awareness the whole time. And after I'm done with the procedure, if I save the kid's life, if it was the kid's father who shot him, I can't release him back into the hands of that father. So there's also a certain level of caring that comes with it. But I can't feel the pain, because if I feel the pain, especially an extreme amount of it, right, I will not be able to perform my duties that involve me performing surgery on this child. There's a certain level of control that I have to maintain over my own emotive situation, precisely because I want to serve this child. My emotions are controlled now, utilizing Stoicism, so that I can fall somewhere in the spectrum of cognitive to emotional empathy, so that I can control where I am on the spectrum based on my evaluation of the circumstances, right? So if my evaluation of the circumstances dictates a level of distance so that I can keep myself from being traumatized, so that I can perform my duty for the child, right? So that I can continue to come back to work the next day and the next day, right? Whether I'm a surgeon or whether I'm a rape counselor, right? I mean, I have to be able to continue with my duties and to serve these people, which means it's not that you shut off all care, but it's that you have a far more cognitive relationship with the problem, the person, the situation than you would if that was your daughter, right? Or if that was your best friend, or if that was your brother. And a lot of that has to do with your decision as to how much control you want to have, which you utilize Stoicism to get to. But also a lot of it has to do with your intentionality and awareness of the situation. Let me actually be in a position where I have the wisdom, where I can engage in the analysis of how emotive I want to be. Maybe I start this relationship far more emotionally distant. I would assume that's how most people start relationships. And then maybe as time goes on, I allow myself to empathically, emotionally connect to this person and reveal vulnerabilities because they have earned it. And because that is the only way I can gain love in this world. And I trust, because of my Stoic capabilities, that if I get sucker punched in the heart by this person, I'll withstand that too. And there's like an extraordinary amount of power, I think, in that approach. You have control. not them, over your connectedness and how it manifests.
Incredibly well said. It's amazing too, because we come through this, I face this sort of problem sometimes, I guess you could say, in our coaching, where we have people who come to us who obviously are aware of Stoicism, but they're very much in line with, let's say, hard Stoicism that has no empathy whatsoever involved in it. And they do this thing where they say, well, I have to get up and I have to make my bed every single day. And I have to go to the gym every day. And if I don't do these things, well, then I'm just a terrible person. And my life's, I can't be Stoic if I'm not disciplined. And I always have to kind of push back and just be like, no, it's okay. Because, and I always present it as a way of like resource management, right? You only have so much energy in a given day. And if that day doesn't leave a space open for you to go to the gym because you need to focus on your kids or someone or something else going on, then that's what you do. And that's what a good Stoic does as a resource management sort of approach. But I love how you're kind of, as you were speaking, all I was hearing was that empathy is kind of like that governor, is like that thing where you're sort of checking in with your heart and you're not always just focused on the mental side of things of like, okay, I need to accomplish these tasks. It's make sure that I'm kind of listening to my heart and making sure that these tasks are truly aligned with how I'm feeling and doing and that sort of thing. So it has been a thing to sort of unwind the misconceptions of Stoicism. But I do think that the way you've presented it with empathy is kind of that perfect counterweight, that perfect counterbalance to the more, let's say, harsher sides of Stoicism. Was that a concept or an idea that sort of came to you throughout writing or during writing?
Yeah, well, no, it came to me at the very beginning and then it evolved as I was writing. But Brendan, as you said, in terms of resource management, I 100% agree. If you are dried up and you need to rest that day, it's okay to skip the gym. And if you have a crying baby in their crib waiting for you to go get them and change their diaper and feed them, you do have to get yourself out of bed, right? That is a different set of circumstances. And so your ability to read, and the Stoics might call this justice, right? We would call it, I don't know, responsibility or a value-driven outlook or whatever it might be in modern linguistics, right? But to have a component of what is the right thing to do. And, I get to this in the book toward the very end where I start talking about the ethics. And then yes, again, there pops the wrong question. What is the right thing to do? But some things, if your baby's crying, it doesn't matter how tired you are. Right? It doesn't matter how exhausted you are or how hungover you are or how much pain you're in. If you have the physical capability, you must get up and assist your child, right? Because without you, they would be utterly helpless. And that is a sense of justice. It is a sense of responsibility. It is a sense of ethics, right? So it's knowing when you can stay in bed and when you have to get out and making those decisions on the basis of your greater value system and not just how you feel that day. Plenty of days when I don't feel like getting out of bed. Plenty, for a number of reasons, right? And if I just tell myself, hey, it's okay, I can just stay in bed today, but I lose my job, or I'm late to pick up my kids, or I miss out on an extraordinary experience that my friends were planning, that whatever it might be, right? And then there are some days when no, I can. It's okay if I don't make it to this breakfast networking event. It's not going to make or break me, right? And I need this rest. And how do I know this? I am performing an evaluative decision on the basis of my own values, what I'm willing to compromise, what I'm willing to not. And one of my values is self-care. And so as long as you recognize that, another one of my values is professional success, but mental health and self-care, also one of my values. So I have to weigh these things and balance them. Right? I would drive myself completely crazy and kill myself to serve my child. I would, but that's not something I would do for my boss. It's not, right? And so, and I think it's important to recognize that difference and that distinction. And what makes me really sad, Brendan, is the number of people who are killing themselves for their boss, and then they're completely depleted for their child or their spouse or their friends or their parents. They come home and they have nothing left to give. And, if you had to do that to put food on the table because you're a struggling immigrant working 15 hours a day just to get food on the table, I get it, man. I'm not judging you. But if you didn't have to do that, if you're just doing it because you want to be one notch further up the ladder, which I think happens a lot, right? In the modern world of competition and ambition, certainly happens a lot to me. then it's a mistake. And I know that it's a mistake. And it's up to me to decide in any given situation how to weigh that. I just hope to be able to have the space and the tools and the practices that build me up to do that. So what the book does is it's essentially like, imagine if you're a bodybuilder. The book shows you this is a kind of a stretch, and this is a kind of a muscle building exercise, and this is a kind of a this. But really the overall goal is to show up to the competition, be the strongest person there, right? Do it ethically and cleanly so that you can leave successful, right? But the book focuses on the process a lot.
Yeah, I love that, and especially how you kind of explain that, the how the book focuses, and I wanted to kind of move towards that as well, the practices and that process, because you really described it in such a lovely way with that story of your mother again, with the morality police officer. You talk about, and from one way, obviously, when we talk about coaching, I was reading it as like a guide to being a coach as well, because you talk about these, and not just as a coach, but also as a person, right? Because one of the skills that you talk about is like active listening, and one of the things was more like the giving people more that pause, right? Just like the silence part of it. So when you talk about these skills, the labeling it was, but also the mirroring, and there was another one, the probing questions, right? If you read any kind of coaching book, that all those things come into play. But how do you present it in such a lovely way, and again with a very practical example? How would you want the kind of people to read that and apply that to their life and use it for their benefit, and also, as you said, the benefit of the people around them and the community at large?
So what Benny is talking about now, and beautifully summarizing, is essentially the first half of the book that discusses and teaches how to increase your empathic awareness so that you're more aware of the situation around you. As a coach, Benny, you would use that to assist the person with whom you are working. But as a negotiator, you could be using that against your counterpart, right? So it doesn't have to be in the context of assistance. It can be in the context of a hostile negotiation, and the same rules follow. And that's what's really extraordinary about it, is these rules and tools of how do I listen? Well, why am I listening? I am listening to gain information. That is the purpose. Right? Now, I might be gaining information because I love this person, or I might be gaining information because this is my coaching client and I want to help them, or I might be gaining information because this person's trying to destroy me and I'm not going to be destroyed today, right? But either way, I have to listen for the information. And if I go in with presumptions that color and stain the information, I will have incomplete information with which to make my decisions. And therefore, my decisions will be inferior. Right? So that's the active listening piece. The pause piece is, again, same thing. It can be any context. It can be I'm helping someone. It can be I'm making sure someone doesn't harm me or harm my child or harm my company or harm my employees, right? And so that pause is an opportunity to gather information and to create a particular type of dynamic, right? So we go through all the tools and they teach you exercises on how to create the pause, exercises on how to be a better listener, right? They teach you the why you might want to do this. And then they show you, well, here's how you could apply this in a parenting context. Also, here's how you could apply it in a negotiation context, right? The last one you mentioned, probing questions, I would say is the most difficult one, because the reality is often we gain information by being quiet and listening, which is very hard for people to do, especially like really smart, really ambitious people. But sometimes we have to speak. We have to ask a question in order to gain information, right? How do we ask that question? How do we ask the question not in a way that makes us seem like a superior thinker, because it's not a public debate, but how do we ask the question in a way that reveals the most amount of information? And those are different. My goal here is not to embarrass you or humiliate you. My goal is to gain information from your answer. So how do I phrase my question? And it literally goes through and it shows you the difference between phrasing a question with, say, the word what instead of the word why. The word why is very accusatory. People will get defensive and they shut down. And the word what is very open-ended and it allows people to open up. And so then it takes you through those tools in your guide. So that's like the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book is all the tools, dichotomy of control, habituation, discomfort embracing, memento mori, all the tools of stoicism that you utilize in your practice so that when you're in those high stress situations, you can approach them in a calm and regulated manner that allows you to proceed with wisdom and clarity instead of instinct.
I wanted to see if Brendan was still there because he was having a little bit
He's
of a
glitching. We
He's
love you,
glitching, yeah.
Brendan, even though you're glitching.
No, I love that, and that's why that combination of both empathy and stoicism works so well with those tools, right? And you also described some lovely tools in the Stoic part. Can you talk us a little bit through how those two work together and which ones of the Stoic side that, for example, you would prefer or that helped you most?
Okay, so here's what I'll do. I will talk about how, you guys are Stoics, so you know about the pillars of Stoicism and the main components of Stoicism. I tried instead of digesting, and investigating Stoicism in that way, I tried to just come at it from, here are some of the core principles that if you understand and practice and perform and become excellent at, you can have greater control in how you engage with your empathic read, right? And so it's slightly different than how, for example, a philosophy book might be structured, because it really is a book to help guide you, the individual, on how to be a better Stoic. And hopefully there'll be many more books in the future where I'll get to expand on it. But what I discuss in the book is, first I start with dichotomy of control, because it's such a key component of Stoicism. And it's really important to just have a basic understanding of what that is, what it means, and how it applies to everyday negotiations, everyday situations, everyday conversations, right? And then I talk about some of the things, once you have that awareness, general awareness, then I talk about some of the things that help you create that space between stimuli and response. So for instance, my favorite one is embracing discomfort. Discomfort embracing is an ancient Stoic tool, wherein the Stoic literally seeks out situations that are safe but uncomfortable for them so that they can be practiced at having their discomfort elevated, their emotions peaked, right? And still proceeding with clarity, right? They literally just practice it like you would practice yoga or practice meditation, right? Or practice basketball, right? It's a skill set. You're never going to be there's no such thing as a perfect basketball player, right? But there are some that are superior to others. And no matter how good or bad you are, the more you practice, the better you will become. And that is a fact. The cool thing about philosophical practices is age does not limit you. In fact, it enhances your capabilities. And so that's my favorite one is the discomfort embracing. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Some people do an ice bath. One of the things I like to remind my readers, my listeners is, listen, the goal is to do that which makes you uncomfortable. So if you've become accustomed to the discomfort of the ice bath, it doesn't count anymore. Now you got to move on to something else. Maybe you're uncomfortable with confrontation. Maybe you're uncomfortable with vulnerability. Maybe you're uncomfortable with telling your wife that she looks beautiful. Whatever it is that you're uncomfortable with, but that you think you should be doing, or at least placing yourself safely in that situation so that when you're in it, you can perform well, so that you can perform clearly, so that you can perform wisely, right? That is what you need to be embracing. And that is what you need to be practicing. And there's always another skill. And there's always another emotion, right? You might have completely conquered your fear and your discomfort of confrontation. But what about jealousy or anger or anxiety, right? Or fear? And so now you can move on to the next thing. And so I would say read that portion of the book, and really all of the portions of the book, again, as a process, as an evolution. It is also a little bit of a Keach trend now. So I hate to bring it up, but I got to say, there's a reason for the Keach trend. Memento mori and the practice of death awareness is something I do daily. And, I think it's become an Instagram meme that's gone viral, because it works. That's why it works. I literally do it on a daily basis. And that is the practice. And I'm sure you and your listeners already know this, the practice of reminding myself that I will die, which of course is a reminder that I'm not dead yet. Right? Which of course is the means of evaluating not only the significance of every moment of my permanent life, but the relative insignificance of minor discomforts along my journey. And so that, like, I carry the coins with me. Yesterday, I actually don't have mine with me right now because yesterday my daughter had an algebra exam and I gave her my memento mori coin to carry with her. And so I'm coinless today, but just like little reminders or things to say to yourself. Does this matter? Right. And to justify your meaning. I do matter. There are things that matter, right? But maybe not this traffic jam, or maybe not this idiot driver who just cut me off, or maybe not the jerk who just shoved me on his way out the door, right? Maybe that doesn't matter, right? And it's up to me to evaluate that. Again, like, it's not up to some external person, deity, being, someone to tell me what to value. All they can do is teach me how to weigh it and how to move forward. And memento mori is an excellent tool to do that.
Oh, yeah. No, that's, I have to say, Shermin, as I started reading the book, it was something that, because, obviously I've read a fair amount of books in the Stoic sphere and it was interesting and notably different with yours is Stoicism isn't necessarily a big proponent of it or a big piece of it in the beginning and not till you really get to the end. And at first, I'm going to be honest, when I was reading it, I was like, all right, is this a Stoic book? What's going on here? But then I get to the end and it wraps it all up beautifully. And I realized upon conclusion, like after actually finishing the book, starting with kind of the beginning and the kind of the empathy side first forced me to then look at Stoicism through a different lens that I had been looking through it for the last 10 years. And you brought up a very interesting kind of discussion in that Stoic piece there on one of the virtues of courage and specifically related to the movie Gladiator. So I think every Stoic book that's maybe ever been written mentions Gladiator at some point because it's such an important movie in our world. But you had an idea that I've never heard anyone say, which is talking about Maximus being courageous. So Shermin, is Maximus a representation of someone acting as a courageous person?
Here's what I would say. Maximus clearly shows courage, right? Here's what, including Stoic courage. Here's what I would say. He did not reach the peak of his maximum capability of Stoic courage because the justice that he sought was based on revenge and not an external form of justice. And that motivation makes a difference. Does that mean he's a coward? Of course not. I've seen that. I love the movie, by the way. I've seen it like 75 times. He's not. He's a cool character to watch. He's awesome. He's amazing. He's powerful. And yet he is slightly misguided. And I think Maximus represents a lot of leaders right now, especially in the corporate world. A lot of people who are not conflict averse, who will go into the arena, who will show up day after day and fight their opponents, but sometimes lose track of the appropriate ethic or motivation that should be driving that fight, right? And it's an example of someone who is already doing great, but is he the pillar of Stoic courage? No, he's not. He's wrongly motivated. He's not fighting for Rome. He should be fighting for Rome. He's not. He's fighting because he's pissed off. He's fighting for vengeance, right? And vengeance is not a component of Stoic courage. It just isn't. Right. And in fact, you might need to relinquish vengeance in order to seek the greater good for Rome. You might need to leave your thirst for that vengeance unsatisfied. That can be a form of courage as well. And it's important to recognize that distinction. And again, I want to be clear to everyone who loves Russell Crowe or loves the movie it's an amazing scene. I've memorized it by heart. It's one of my favorite scenes in movies everywhere. I'll probably watch it right after this podcast again, just for the fun of it, right? Father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. That is what drove him, not Rome. And so I just want to evaluate that. We should take a step back, right, from a philosophical point of view and evaluate that. This kick-ass, awesome, courageous guy, what was he fighting for? And was it the right thing? And I think it's important to ask that question of ourselves. When we show up in that arena day after day, what are we fighting for? And is it the right thing? And by the way, what we are fighting for on day one might be very different than what we're fighting for on day 100. Our motivations and our ethics might change. And so it's okay to pause and also reconsider your motivations. Why am I in this fight? Right? Because that, at the end of the day, that is where the core of your essence, of your being, of your morality lies. That is where the core of your values lie. If Maximus had a value-driven system that put vengeance above allegiance to Rome, then perhaps it would be working for him. But he didn't. Allegiance to Rome was his top priority. But that is not what led him to that arena on that day, right? And so it's, and again, it might have been a component, but it wasn't primary. And so I just think we should take a step back and like examine that and take a look at it for ourselves, right? Forget about this fictional character for a second who looks so cool in his gladiator gear and so strong, and you just want him to like, well, I do. I just want him to like kiss me and take me to bed or something like that. But how about me in the way I perform in the arena of life? What is driving me? And I'll tell you guys, sometimes when I stop to think about it, it's not the right thing. It's not. And if I don't have the right driver, then I'm going to make decisions that are inconsistent with my moral value system. I am. And so stopping to examine that, I think, is really significant. And Brendan, I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you for sticking with the book. It was a rather laborious decision to decide to come into Stoicism a little bit later in the book, especially since the title is Stoic Empathy, not Empathic Stoicism, right? And in fact, we fiddled with changing the title to better reflect the order of the book. At the end of the day, this is the decision we went with because we felt, me and my publisher, my editor, felt that the folks who picked it up because of the Stoicism should be exposed to the empathy side first. And the folks who have an easy time with empathy will fly right through it and will need the Stoicism in the second half. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. And thanks for that answer. And I agree with the gladiator view. I haven't really looked at it, from that side. When I read your book, I was like, that's amazing. And before I pass it over to Brendan, I really enjoyed having you on as we start to wrap it up. And I just wanted to highlight one thing as the kind of the science fiction nerd in me, the reference that you put on, like to Star Trek and wearing the Bajoran. I just watched Deep Space Nine. I was like, yes, although I like Star Wars a little bit more than Star Trek, but that's an old.
No, I liked you so much. Your stock just plummeted, Benny. No.
I did watch all of Star Trek. I do enjoy it as well, but I just really love that reference as well. So no, thank you for writing the book, and I wanted to pass it over to Brendan before.
Okay, but before we let Brendan go, I have to tell you, I can't tell you how much Star Trek my editor cut out of the book. She's like,
really?
Is this a book about Star Trek or is this a book about Stoic empathy?
Oh, show us those, I want to read that stuff as well.
Oh my goodness. I am obsessed. Although I like Star Wars as well. Maybe I'll go into that a little bit more in the next book.
Maybe this isn't the right room to admit this in, but I've never seen a single minute of Star Trek. But I did recently add it to my list on Netflix. So that's something.
Okay. Which series did you add? But this is like a really important public service announcement right now. Brendan, which series are you going to start with?
I don't know the differences.
Okay. All right. So I would recommend either starting with Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good one to start with, although my favorite one is The Next Generation. I think a good one to start with is Deep Space Nine. The Next Generation is a really good one. And then also the new one, Brave New Worlds, is also an excellent series and an excellent introduction to the mythical, philosophical existence of this world that is Star Trek. But I would say Deep Space Nine. You're going to get all the things you need to get with a little bit more advanced technology and television making than you would with Next Generation, which was just a couple of decades before that. And so a little bit older and more dated. Yeah.
I would even add Voyager to that. I loved Voyager.
Thank you. I love Voyager too. I really appreciate you saying that. It's so funny. I'm such a sexist. I just didn't recommend it because I figured he would want a male captain instead of a female captain. So I apologize.
I think Captain Janeway was one of the most powerful captains, in the situation that they were in. And, we can go on about this.
On and on and on and on.
Yeah,
Welcome to the Star Trek.
Podcast just on the philosophy of Star Trek.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
No, but and again, thank you. Just to echo what Benny said, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us. I mean, if I haven't told you enough, I think the book you wrote, Stoic Empathy, is absolutely needed right now and absolutely necessary for anyone that is considering themselves even dabbling in Stoic to pick up and take a read through. So thank you so much for taking the time to write it, and obviously come on and share it with us. Before we do wrap up, obviously I'll give you a chance to kind of share with the listeners where to find you and all those fun things. But I do want to kind of throw like a couple quick fire questions at you real quick.
Okay.
Nothing too crazy. You don't have to think too much about them, but just to kind of know you a little bit better.
Okay.
Well, we know one, right? Star Trek, Star Wars, we know that one.
Right. That was the first one. I already answered it.
What is the book that you read recently that made you think deeply?
It was a Dr. Seuss book, and it was called The Places You'll Go. And I damn near cry every time I read it. Highly recommend it.
Great one. Who is your favorite ancient Stoic?
Epictetus.
And do you have a modern day example or person that you look to as kind of a Stoic guide?
My mother.
And which is the virtue that you need to work on most?
Courage.
Fantastic. But no, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for answering those questions. And yeah, before we wrap, please share with the listeners where they can find you, where they can purchase the book, and just how to keep up with you.
Okay. Well, I have to say, this was an absolute delight. If you guys want to have me back tomorrow, every day, I'll just come by. I'll just I'll photobomb your podcast. I'll just kind of be in the background as you interview other guests. Okay. So you guys, my name is Shermin Kruse. You can find me at www.sherminkruse.com. But since that's like impossible to pronounce and say and spell, I also can be found at www.stoicempathy.com. You can find me on Instagram. There I'm share_Kruse. And because I am old, I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn. So that is the typicality of where you can find me. The book can be purchased anywhere that books are sold. If you have a favorite local bookstore, feel free to request it or pick it up there. If it's easier for you to click that Amazon button, I'm not going to judge you. You got a lot going on in your life. Click the button and get the book. I would ask that you please read it with the grace that all authors ask of you as readers, and forgive me for any shortcomings that the book might have. And having said that, let me know about them, because then I'll add on to the next book. All right. I'd love to hear from you guys. All compliments and criticisms are welcome. I am thick-skinned. I was a litigator for 20 years. So feel free to come at me. You can honeycode it by giving me a compliment first, and then maybe say, hey, you know what I would have loved to hear more about? And then that'll also help me in my podcast appearances, because then I can show up and discuss some of the things the listeners would have loved to, and the readers would have loved to hear more about. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here.
But thank you so much. Spoken like a true Stoic. But yes, definitely pick up the book Stoic Empathy. It's definitely one you need to add to your toolbox. It does a great job at adding in some much needed tools on top of the ones that the Stoics have left for us. So thank you so much for today, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to the Via Stoica Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and leaving a review. Your feedback will help us reach more like-minded people on the journey to self-improvement. If you want to get in touch with us or find more information, you can go to viastoica.com, your one-stop platform for all things Stoicism and living better. And remember, virtue is the only good.